Okay, so this is just a very brief presentation about the story so far, the history of mountain biking, particularly in the last 5 years in the Mount Lofty Ranges. Park managers all over the world are looking for ways to extract greater health and social benefits from parks, while also involving more people in conservation efforts. Returning to the original philosophy that led to the establishment of national parks movement in the 1890s, the idea that people need parks and parks need people, Juna developed a strategy several years ago called People and Parks. The philosophy of the strategy is that through wise use, future generations will continue to enjoy the benefits parks bring, and that people who enjoy parks are more likely to contribute to their care. People and Parks includes a vision and actions to ensure that more people appreciate, understand and help with the conservation of parks. Cycling was seen as a valid contributor to this vision, and the People and Parks strategy included an action to establish the Mount Lofty Ranges as a nationally recognised cycling destination. But why the Mount Lofty Ranges? It's home to 450 native fauna species, 150 native flora species, and is recognised as one of 15 national biodiversity hotspots. But it also happens to have 1.2 million people living on its doorstep, a huge audience to engender renewed support, appreciation and participation for national parks. Needless to say, a strategy for cycling has been controversial. Groups advocating for improved access for cycling in South Australia's parks have argued that their activities are compatible with conservation, while other groups have disagreed. The approach to cycling in the past has been to prohibit, but it's fair to say policies that prohibit cycling have been largely unsuccessful in protecting sensitive sites or vulnerable species from inappropriate trail development, nor have they satisfied the expectations of people who want to ride in and enjoy national parks. Rather than take a negative view of cycling and continue to approach the issue in the same way, which simply wasn't working, it needed a change, and a bold one. Maybe it was time to consider the positives of cycling. Look at ways to harness the enthusiasm of people already using or wanting to use our natural areas. Under these circumstances, reaching an outcome which satisfies all stakeholders is a challenge for public land managers. The South Australian Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources has engaged with non-government organisations and community representatives to design and implement a solution to this challenging problem. Juna engaged the Australian Centre of Excellence for Risk Analysis, who specialise in the development of structured decision-making methodologies to help government agencies make decisions about complex resource use issues characterised by polarised community views. These methodologies integrate community engagement with traditional scientific risk-based approaches. The outcome of that thinking was the Linking Adelaide with Nature, a strategy for trails in the Mount Lofty Ranges. And the result has breathed fresh air into several of the parks of the Mount Lofty Ranges through the establishment of exciting new trail networks. It has also provided some insights into community perceptions about cycling in protected areas and the planning methods which may be used to resolve polarised debates in the community about recreation in parks. So what has been done so far? In consultation with stakeholders in the community, Juna has established a popular network of trails in the Craigburn Farm area of Sturt Gorge Recreation Park. It has opened the existing fire and management track system in Klein Conservation Park to cycling. It has expanded the shared use trail network of Belair National Park by upgrading and opening more existing tracks and trails to cyclists. And most recently, it has transformed the Salisbury Cobble Creek Recreation Park trail network into an important mountain bike destination in the north. But the investment in mountain bike trails has many other benefits other than just great trails for park visitors to walk and ride. It has helped Juna connect with new sections of the community and new generations of park advocates, volunteers and stewards. Here is the first workshop of the self-appointed Cobbler Creek Trail Riders Trail Care Group. Only half of the people that turned up on that first day are in the photo. Lots of people turned up with even younger children, and they were given tasks to walk the trail network and trim the vegetation on the trail corridors. Here the guys are working they disassembled a dangerous, illegally constructed jump and made something a bit more sustainable and user-friendly. This is an example of how Juna transformed a neglected corner of Sturt Gorge Recreation Park by turning an old disused access track into a popular link trail, enabling residents, visitors and tourists to access the new Craigburn Trail network from a previously inaccessible side of the park. Tracks that may not be a high priority for strategic fire management now form valuable links for walkers and cyclists. This track was seasonally closed every year due to PC concerns and was a maintenance nightmare. The investment in cycling gave us the means to upgrade the trail, make it safe for visitors to use, make it easier to maintain, and the surface treatment enabled us to allow access 365 days a year. By applying best practice trail construction principles to our tracks, we've made the track safer, more sustainable, and reduce the risk to the surrounding environment. This is an erosion gully caused by excessive stormwater runoff into Sturt Gorge Recreation Park. The pictures really don't do justice how deep the rut is, but the trail was a critical link in the park's trail network, and the work involved in making the crossing safe was well beyond our local trail volunteers. We've been experimenting with a product called fiberglass reinforced plastic to replace traditional timber decking. It has very good grip in the wet, allows water, light and dirt through the tread. We're also often stuck with an existing trail corridor. This section of trail was unsustainable, slippery and only getting worse. In an ideal world, we would relocate the trail to a better alignment. However, in this case, most of the trail was fine and it was only short sections that didn't work. We try to keep a really good balance of improving the trail by using natural stone as well as the sustainable products to make the trail safer, but also reduce maintenance requirements in the future. But we're not just about building trails, converting them or upgrading them either. Some trails are formed over time before better alternatives have been provided, and in some cases these trails are in highly sensitive areas of high conservation value. Whilst we might have legitimate reasons to close the trail, actually doing it successfully can be quite difficult, and just throwing a couple of sticks across the entrance doesn't cut it anymore. I've found that the successful closure depends on many things: understanding who uses the trail and why. Is there an alternative route or destination we can provide or point them to? It's important to tell people what you're doing and why, and give them alternatives. So providing information on the sign about the value of the area, what else we're doing in the park to upgrade other trails to make them more attractive, and also giving them information of other areas they can ride or access if that's what they'd like to do. It's important to erect a fence as a barrier, and the fence must suit the purpose. Some need to be more robust than others. Anchor the fence to natural control points so they're not easily traversed. And manage water issues. Just closing a trail to users won't stop it eroding. Look for the source of the problem and fix it. And only after all these things have been considered and implemented can you start throwing on the sticks. The investment in mountain biking and walking trails has also assisted Juna to make a dent in weed populations that were far too big for our volunteers to tackle and would otherwise have been left unmanaged in the foreseeable future. This section of the Adventure Loop in Belair is an area well known to locals as Hidden Valley. The trail links Saddle Hill Road with the Berry track. It was a little known, rarely used section of trail. By opening it up to bikes, we invested in extensive weed treatment and removal. Huge amounts of blackberry, pittosporum, broom and gorse have been removed from the area. And these really are just some of the more localised practical benefits that investment in improved walking and cycling opportunities have provided. The new and improved trail networks are also already engaging young people with nature, and these kids are our next generation of volunteers and stewards of the future. So where to from here? On the 10th of March, the state government announced that funding would be made available to further the goal of turning the Adelaide Hills into an international mountain bike destination. The project will require the participation of all public land managers in the Mount Lofty Ranges and government agencies involved in strategic planning for tourism, health, recreation and infrastructure. Tenders have been called for contractors with international tourism expertise to prepare a technical report on the critical factors needed to achieve the vision. The project will also include a community engagement process to work with all the stakeholders and a robust risk analysis to ensure biodiversity values are not compromised. The project is also linked to the election commitment to connect residents of Northern and Southern Adelaide with nature, thereby increasing Metropolitan Park's visitorship. In realising this vision, we expect to create significant opportunities for commercial tourism operators and local business, and the new and improved trails and visitor facilities throughout the Mount Lofty Ranges will also benefit local residents by enabling more people to enjoy and experience our natural areas through healthy and sustainable activity.
It's great to be back in the Adelaide Hills. Been back in Australia now for about 3 weeks. Started out at the Australian Mountain Bike Summit, Mount Buller Resort in Victoria, and cold and rainy, very, very difficult temperatures. And then last week I was in Alice Springs. Temperature was, 40, 41 degrees Celsius, Africa hot. And it's good to be back here where the temperature is a little more towards the middle ground. So we've been talking about mountain biking as a way to bring people back into the forest, as an economic driver, as a health benefit. And it was great to go to Mount Buller and be part of the very first IMBA Epic. And an IMBA Epic is a designated trail that happens to be of wild and scenic nature, and usually long distance. And if you've ridden an IMBA Epic, usually you will come back barely able to stand, because it's that kind of an experience. It's just like a long hike. It's like, an all-day adventure. And these guys did it right. What I loved about it was about taking you through the different forests. You started up in the high alpine and the snow gums, and you finished down to the ash, and then eventually you were down by the creeks and the rivers, giant tree ferns. And for someone from out of country to get to ride, if I could pick one trail that kind of brought me to a part of Australia, that was a really great window into nature for me. And we have these kinds of trails all over the country, all over the world, especially in the United States and Canada. But it's not just about being wild and scenic and a beautiful trail, it's also about having sort of a family. For a trail to work and to last, it has to have people. People need trails, trails need people. And an IMBA Epic, before we can give it our stamp of approval, we have to have usually a land manager who really is into this, and a community, and usually a bike club. And that's what Buller has. It has those three things: to keep that thing alive over time. And I've gotten to work in every state and territory in Australia now, and I've seen hundreds and hundreds of miles of great trails in this country. And almost all the new trails I see that are getting built are all about these three things. And you should write this down, because this is so important to what makes a great trail. It's sustainability, it's rideability, and it's respect for the land. And whether I'm building a trail by hand with volunteers or youth corps, or I'm building a trail with big machines, and there's so many different types of trails now, but we at IMBA try to have this balance of this triangle. And sometimes sustainability and drainage might be at the top of the triangle, and sometimes we tip it to where maybe the rideability is the strong part of the triangle. Sometimes it's respect for the land, because I get to work in so many different types of land agencies. Some are about conservation, some are more about recreation. So there's so many different ways we can do this. Trails are how we experience nature, and it does not matter if you are on foot, you're on a bike, you're on a horse, you're on a motorcycle, you're on an ATV. If we don't have correct trails, then the land is the one that suffers. And Jim Angel, who's a famous Professional Trail Builders Association board member, he said, the users don't need trails, the land does. And of course, this is more in a desert environment. This is the Superstition Wilderness area in Arizona. And as the city encroaches and gets closer and closer to the wilderness area, we're seeing more and more and more trails just from people walking. This isn't even open to bikes, motorcycles, or anything else. This is just people walking, because we haven't gone back to that area and kind of done a master plan or new trails or sort of organized the trail system so people are doing it on their own. And because of that, it's more opportunistic and people are walking all over the landscape. So it's up to us in this very room to go back to these places and look at, well, should we revisit this trail network? And that's what we're doing here. So trails are no doubt the most beneficial way to stay fit. I mean, how many people in this room go to a gym to get fit? Boy, a handful. How many people in this room go outside to stay fit and healthy? Wow, yeah. When I was up in Alice, it was amazing to go out in the morning and see how many people were running, hiking, walking their dogs, riding their bikes, and they were on it. It was like, okay, I've got this little window before it gets Africa hot, so I'm gonna get out there and do it, What I noticed too, and it doesn't matter where I am in the world, is I'll often see people walk their dogs. It's like, wow, everybody will make time to go walk their dog, but how many people will make time to walk themselves? The people in this room, we do. So a little bit about IMBA. Been around since 1988, when mountain bikers were closed out of certain areas in California, and now it's become a global organization. And in most cases, these are the reasons that we get locked out of places. Fear of resource damage, fear of, or perceived fear of user conflict, liability concerns, trail erosion, illegal trail building. Those are the big ones. So we have answers to all those things. And we could be in this room for the next 3 days just going through every single one of these in about 30 countries, and I would have some great examples of all those sort of answers that we might be looking for. So 35,000 members, 750 chapters, clubs and bike patrols in all 50 states and 30 countries now. So very much a global organization. And what is interesting is many of our IMBA clubs aren't even mountain bikers. This is my friend Liz. When I took this picture, she was 72 years old. You guys call them bushwalkers. We call them hikers. Liz does not ride a mountain bike. She never will ride a mountain bike. But she maintains a trail system in Pine Top Lakeside, Arizona, that is probably 80% mountain bikers. So she needs to understand those little differences of what a mountain bike trail might be compared to what a hiking trail is. And she has both of our books, and it's so interesting to see our retired community embracing the sport of mountain biking. And these are shared use trails, so we see hikers, mountain bikers, and occasional equestrians. But that's kind of something we do a lot, is we have these shared use trail coalitions. You know, it's not just bikes, it's not just hikers, it's not just equestrians. Let's band together and maintain the great trails and places we love. So that's happening around the world. One of my favorite clubs I work with is in Durango, Colorado. Anybody been to Durango? All right, what did you like about Durango?
The rivers and the mountains.
Yeah, did you get on some of the trails? And
No, we were there when it was snowing and we were bogging.
okay. So you can see the town of Durango down here almost. I think we've got 16,000, population of 16,000, let's say. Their club, 3,000 members. So, I mean, what is that? You know, a fourth, a third, a fifth of the entire town is a member of this club called Trails 2000. And they maintain 350 miles of trail. That club built 250 miles of trail by hand, without machines, over the last 15 or so years. They've partnered with 8 different land agencies. So, Town of Durango, neighboring towns, county, Forest Service, BLM, private lands, and it's all connected. You could be on just about any street, any neighborhood in Durango, and grab your dog, go for a walk. Get on a bike, go for a ride. Get on your horse, go. And it's all connected, and it all comes back to town. But what's happening in the States right now is sort of a major shift. You know, it used to be all about shared use. It was like, hey, we can share all these great trails, and if you're a mountain biker or a trail runner or a hiker, these are some destination places. Anybody in this room been to some of these places? All right, you're well traveled. How about anybody else? Okay, so this is going to be your homework. These are some places you have to go if you like to hike. And if you like trails, these are the places you have to check out. And as a mountain biker, traveling around the country, any of these places were destinations. It's like you had to go and ride in Sun Valley because they had 500 miles of trail. What is that for us? 800 kilometers. 800 kilometers of signed, mapped, well thought out, shared use trails. But what's happening now is because there's so many people out on these trails, is we're starting to organize the trail systems a little differently. And I call this pockets of single use or single direction within a shared use trail network. So what we might have is a few loops or outings that's just for hikers only, you know, so that you can, it's all about solitude. You know, you're not worrying about, is a bike gonna come up from behind you? Is a horse in front of you? You know, it's just a place of solitude. So whenever I do a new trail system, one of the first things I'm looking for is where can I put my hikers and give them their own sense of place? And then I also look at, well, what about my mountain bikers? Can I create a descent that's a little bit more purpose-built? That is, maybe the turns are raised up a little bit, maybe there's some rollers or little features to make it more interesting, almost like a little bit of a roller coaster in the forest. So these are some things that we'll do. And IMBA Trail Solutions, so this is who I work for. We have the International Mountain Bicycle Association, which is the nonprofit advocacy group, and then IMBA Trail Solutions, which is the paid arm, which is all about, you know, helping design and plan and construct trail systems. And I get to work with land managers who have vision, land managers who are ready to think big. You know, I only get brought in when there's a willing community and a land manager, and there's funding to go forward. Years ago, I got to work in Kurt Gowdy State Park. And I was brought into this part of Wyoming. How many people have been to Wyoming? You've heard of Wyoming. Think about Yellowstone National Park. Think about Grand Teton National Park. I mean, those are the places you go when you go to Wyoming. But Todd wanted to bring people into other parts of Wyoming that we would normally drive through as fast as we can. but he found these pockets of wild, beautiful places. And he brought me in and said, hey, Joey, I've got this park. It's a state park. We have 300 acres to start out with. Hectares, please. How much? 300 acres. What is that, like 700? Okay. Or maybe you want to ring that one up too. We'll come back to hectares. And you got your Mac, you got it. And one of the first things we thought about was, where are we going to put the trailheads? And if you're on a bike, you don't want your trailhead at the top. You don't want to ride down with the kids and have those kids have to ride back out of a hole, right? Just like surfing. It's like you paddle out and then the idea is to catch a wave back in. Same with, up skiing. It's like you ski up the mountain and then you ski back down. Mountain biking, same deal. You want to try to avoid trailheads at the top, try to put them at the bottom. So there's a hub at the bottom, a hub at the top, maybe in the middle, and there's clusters of trails. In this case, we did our machine-built family-level trails, our green circle, let's call it, that connected the campgrounds and the 2 different lakes we had out there. And then once we got further away from the trailheads, things got to be more, hand-built or more difficult, and very much bike optimized. It's all about this really amazing granite rock. So, having the mountain bikers being able to play in these areas and having a trail that actually goes right through these things that other places might say, oh, that's crazy, that's way too dangerous. It's like, no, it's fine. These riders are looking for this sort of adventure, just like we do on foot. And what happened there almost immediately was it changed the focus from the water-based recreation to get people out into the forests above the lakes, places where people hadn't really been a lot before. And we started in about 2005. By 2006, visitation increased by 39%. In 2008, during the gas crunch, the recession, visitation declined in every park but Kurt Gowdy State Park. And there it actually increased by 7%. And then here's some numbers. I don't have one for 2014, but obviously it just keeps growing and growing. We started here, and now we're up to here. Because these trails are very much purpose-built. They're not just trails that go willy-nilly all over. It's all about having, the easy on up to the intermediate to more advanced, and having this beautiful granite rock to play with, Very much like a playground, but you're on your bike. Double the economic dollars for Laramie and Cheyenne. So 2 different towns are reaping the benefits from this one trail network. We are now up to 32 miles, which is not a lot of mileage. And what's very interesting is they had the money to build and to bring in different professional trail builders, but it was also about having volunteers. One of the biggest volunteer groups would drive 2 hours away from the state of Colorado to go build trail in the state of Wyoming, leaving perfectly good trails near their homes to go help with a trail system that was brand new and exciting and different and purpose-built. What was my question?
Interrupting, how do you establish your figures?
My what?
3 to 6 million. How do you establish those figures? And where
Good question. So this is a state park, 2 entrances.
Yep.
So we've got gates at each entrance, and they are taking who's coming in every day, and are they on a mountain bike, or are they hiking, or are they going fishing? So they're able to really track it. And for everyone here, as we go down this road here perhaps, we want to be able to track those numbers because that's really, really vital information. And that might not be easy to do sometimes, but there's also trail counters that can tell if it's a bike or a hiker or equestrian. So yeah, really good question. Let's see, what did I ask? 35 miles or 30 miles? How many Ks is that?
It's 50 Ks.
How much?
56.
56 Ks. So 56 kilometers. 56 kilometers, you guys. That's not a whole lot of mileage. And yet it's crazy successful because it's so purpose built.
So Joey, is there an entry fee on those gates?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Unless you're a volunteer and you've worked on that, you get a season pass.
At what stage do you have the management in place because of overcrowding?
So that's another great thing, is because some of our trails are single direction, you could throw 4,000, 3,000, you could throw armies of people on those trails and it doesn't feel crowded because it's single direction. So that's another good question. We'll dive into more of that stuff later because that's another really good way to manage your humans. And you can't do it everywhere. But so you guys check this out. Our intention was to bring mountain biking into the park. But in bringing mountain biking, we also created a new trail system that they never had before. Now look at the benefits that the Kurt Gowdy Trails did. So an American Cancer Society annual charity walk. Laramie County School is bringing at-use risk onto the trails for trail construction and just for hiking. Warren Air Force Base uses the trails as rehabilitation for returning soldiers. So it's a way to get, the troops who've been out there and they're going through whatever, it gets them back into nature. They can just get on a trail and just go for a walk. In some cases, get on a bike. And whatever kind of stuff is in their head, that can be put to the side for a little while they're on their bike or on those trails because they're focusing on the trails and nature. So money, where do we get money from? In our country, where I'm from, our federal land managers don't have a dime left to spend on trails. So now it's up to us. It's so often up to the people who use the trails to find that funding. At Kurt Gowdy, and Kurt Gowdy was a sports television announcer. Very famous man. Park was named after him. And he had some really great friends who happened to be in the sporting goods industry. And they said, hey, we'd love to do something in the memory of Kurt. Could we help you with something? And Todd said, we wanted to do a new entrance gateway. So what does 250,000 sound like? And they found this number. And Todd and his engineers and his artists, his architects came up with a gate that fit like the Wild West, but it also fit sort of the sporting. Anyways, the family loved the gate and said, wow, that's just exactly what we were hoping for. And I think it was like 250,000. So that's a crazy amount of money, but what a great way to enter the park. Now they've donated, I think, $3 million, and then the park matched that, and now they have a visitor center that is completely state-of-the-art. They never would have gotten that money from just the parks. That money came from private donors, other citizens, grants, things like that. So, very good. Now, I know we're in Wyoming. We've been in Wyoming for a while now, but it's a great story because Kurt Gowdy's become such a success that now we're doing Glendo and Guernsey. So 35 miles here, 70 here, we're shooting for 75 here. So it's making a destination, and it's a part of Wyoming that most people, like I said, just hurry through. But there happens to be these really beautiful pockets. But having trails makes it relevant to the people to get outside. Now, this is Guernsey. Now, it sounds like not a whole lot of you guys have been to Yellowstone, but it's your job to get there. So, what, we got somebody who's been? Okay, awesome. And really any of the national parks in the east or the west, and part of the thing I like about our national parks is the way that they built not just the trails, but the amenities. So the picnic shelters, the bridges, the lookout towers, anything has this very, very unique style. Built out of stone, big logs. I mean, this is the best of the best. Guernsey State Park was the laboratory in the 1930s where the Civilian Conservation Corps and the national parks got together and said, how are we going to go forward, and what are these kind of things that we're going to do? So they taught young men how to build bridges, how to build stairs for trails, and it really is like the laboratory. Well, Guernsey caught fire a few years ago, and we lost 22 miles. 22 miles, sorry guys, of historic CCC trails. And the CCCs are some of the best trail building on the planet, you know. Very, very well done trails. And I was tasked with finding some of these trails. So I was given maps from the 1920s and 1930s. No GPS, there's no fancy new whatever. It was just like, here's an old hand-drawn map from 1929. Can you go find the old trails? And they were so easy to find because they were always the same design that we use. We call it rolling contour. There's one of the old trails. I could also find them by the stone staircases and other stonework. So I found most of the trails, and now we're going to bring those trails back into the system. And it's about getting people back into this park. You know, it's going to rehab itself, you know, plants are going to come back, the trees are going to come back, and we're going to bring those trails back into the system. We're also going to do new trails. But what's interesting is there's a road right over here, and you can drive and hike over to this point and look down on the reservoir. So what we're doing with our mountain bike trails is whenever we can, we'll put a new trailhead or a parking area very, very far away from where our walkers are going. Because if I can put my trailhead down here, my riders can still make their way up to that destination, but I don't have to clog up that parking area with more bikes. And this way, my bikers get a longer outing and they get a descent. You know, it's all about giving them that descent, that fun part of it all. Guys, real quick question, anybody? And you guys feel free to get up and go to the bathroom, whatever you have to do. So, as I said, we have our first two books. We're on trail building, trail management, mostly the shared use sort of model. But today, we have a brand new book out. We have that anywhere? Now, this book might sort of alarm or scare some of us. But what it is about is, again, getting kids off their butts. And so you guys can pass this around if you want to. Just skim through it. And we're seeing this thing called bike parks, or community bike parks. And oftentimes they're down in the city. Typically they're not even put in our parks. Sometimes they're at a visitor center. Sometimes they're at a campground. But we have all these new tools as far as trail design and trail construction. This is in Switzerland, and many of our towns now in the mountains are using this strategy to get kids back outside again. You know, we can see the playground, and then here is a surfaced pump track. So what that is that you don't need a $6,000 mountain bike. You can rock up on any old bike there is and be of any age, and you can work your bike around this oval. And they're doing field trips for elementary school kids. So for 2 hours every few weeks, bike instructors grab these little monsters, take them out of school, get them outside, and put them on this track, and it gets them hooked. It gets them into being outside again. And from there, we're doing some purpose-built trails that sort of go out into the wilderness, into the forest. So it's a way of tricking them into nature, let's just say.
Is it multi-use too, Joe? Like, for skateboarding?
Yeah,
skating and
I mean, another really great question is you'll see kids on their little two-wheel razors and some skating. I think a perfect model would be to have a skateboard park where you have all the different amenities. That's nice to have all of them, because there's little differences. But I saw like the opening video when they opened this, and it was everything. You saw kids on skateboards, any kind of bike you could imagine, and it was just about, they couldn't believe that they had that right there in downtown. I use this word a lot. You can write it down, progression. And that means any trail system, if it's going to be open to bikes, there needs to be the really easy type of trail all the way to maybe the more difficult. And then it just depends on what we're comfortable with as far as how difficult we go. This is a little community bike park in Frisco, Colorado, and you can see the dirt jumps. This is the easy, more intermediate, advanced, and finally expert. So there's progression, just like at a ski area. You start out easy and you work your way to the more difficult. The people in this clinic are all women, and more than half of them are moms. Okay? 5 years ago, we didn't really see that. And now, because of this bike park idea, we're seeing, families going outside and getting to share time in the bike park. This is near where the home of IMBA. This is the Valmont Bike Park. You can go online, you can Google this, you can check out different videos. This is another part of your homework. This is something very new and a super successful story. It is only 42 acres. Okay, if you say so. And when you get to Valmont, the first thing you see is what we call the tot track, okay? This isn't for the big kids, this is for the little kids. And the tot track, these are called Strider bikes. You guys have Striders? You know what those are? Anybody? So a Strider bike doesn't have brakes, and it doesn't have gears, and it doesn't have pedals. It's just this little thing that you scoot around on when you're like 2 or 3 years old. I wish I would have had that. And the tot track is like a raised cement pad or track or oval that's got a little bit of tilt, a little bit of fun. It would fit inside this room, maybe a little bit bigger. The great thing about the tot track is it's right next to the bathroom and right next to the playground. So if one kid has a meltdown, no big deal. You just, okay, there's the playground, just drop the bike, no big deal. Got to change some diapers, the bathroom's right there. So it's very much about the family, And after that, you graduate to the skills loop. A very short little loop with alternate features. Engineered, maybe they're built out of stone, maybe they're built out of steel with metal decking. And then you graduate to the cross-country trails. And we put this in, it's called the Glades. And the idea was that it wasn't just a bike park facilities. We wanted somewhere for the adults to go and get some exercise. And these trails in the Glades, you could run them, you could hike them, you could ride your bike. Very much like, I guess, adult swim at a swimming pool. It's like, all right, kids, it's time for the big kids to get some laps and get some exercise. The thing is, the Glades got completely taken over by families and kids. So it was created as a place to go out and burn some miles really quick, but it got taken over by the kids. Why? Because it was fun and it wasn't scary. It was only maybe a kilometer loop, but you can see that, we had to bring dirt in. We had to lift the dirt and tilt the dirt and make it really flowy and fun. And on any afternoon, it's just completely packed with kids and families. You'll see moms like pushing their kids on bikes and dads doing it. It's a really neat model. And then you graduate to the pump track. And the pump track is dirt surfaced. And again, you don't need any specific kind of bike. You can just go in there and play around. Typical pump track, maybe the size of this room and then half again as much. Everybody in this room could ride a pump track on any kind of bike. Then we graduate up to the dirt jumps. Same thing, progression. There's our easy stuff, intermediate stuff, and then finally advanced. because the pump track teaches them how to jump their bikes. And the dirt jumps gives them a place to do that. So they're not doing it in the forest illegally. Now, probably one of the most important parts of the bike park is what we call a flow trail. And we're seeing these everywhere. Part of that Mount Buller Imba Epic was basically, what was that, a 300-meter descent?
And 8 kilometres, just that.
8 kilometers of just that. And we could say, wow, what a big footprint, what a, we really manipulated the land. But also think of it as a way to take pressure off your shared use trails. You're putting the bikes on a descent that's just for them, that's super fun and exciting. The flow trail at this bike park, again, not a whole lot of distance. That's the whole thing, you guys. Maybe 50 vertical feet. Very short, 30 seconds. But you could ride this thing all day long. Super fun. Great to see the kids out there.
What's the pump track roughly worth to build a basic one?
It all depends. And that book's getting passed around right now. They're pretty cheap. I've heard 5,000, I've heard 20. It just depends really on where you're going to get the dirt, what kind of dirt, and how big, and just how nice you want to make that thing. So what's great about Valmont is we actually have a slope style course too for the big kids. So that's pretty important to have these different ingredients. What's nice about the community bike park, you guys, is that we don't need, it's not like golf. We don't need 18 holes. Really all you need is maybe, a driving range, maybe 9 holes, maybe a putting area, something like that. So it's a really great way to take some of the pressure off your shared use trail network. And again, it's about partners. When this thing started off, the city only could really come up with $1 million. But the community was so hungry, another $2 million came around. And in the end, that's a $4 million bike park. So it's also a gateway trail network. So there's some things you guys can read. When I showed this slide in Wyoming, I learned that in Wyoming, 1 in 4 children are obese now. I don't know what the rate is in Australia, but it's an epidemic in the United States. So we call these gateway trails or gateway trail networks. And in this case, how many paved pathways do we have in a city or a town? And then what we've got to see here in Arkansas was a group that came up with money, private donor, said, I want to do something more for the kids and for bikers. And rather than just the bike path, is let's do some alternate lanes that had alternate features. And so each one of these legs created a loop. And each loop was like a link in a chain going from here to there. But there was like an alternate way to take that same corridor, make it fun. And so these gateway trails or trail networks are all about, creating riding for kids, beginners, families, the underprivileged and the less fit riders. So it's not just about the 50-year-old male who can afford an $8,000 mountain bike. It's now we're able to create these amenities, these trails, these features that anybody can do on any bike. So this is a project that I started working on in 2004. And has anybody been to Northern California? Oh, geez, man. What's your name?
Spent a lot of time traveling.
Have you been to the Lost Coast? Okay, so this is the Lost Coast. This is also your homework. It is a national conservation area. It is the very first national conservation area on BLM land in the United States. And since then, we have wilderness coastline. So even one step above a national park or a national conservation area, we have wilderness. And wilderness means no bikes, no roads, no nothing. And this is kind of a bad map, but here's California. You know, there's the Lost Coast up there. There's San Diego and LA, Oregon, Washington. And this very tip of the coast was so steep that they couldn't put a highway along the coast. So they put the highway 70 miles inland, and that became the conservation area and also the wilderness area a few years later. And so this is all wilderness coastline. So again, this is your homework to go in here. We have 24 miles of wilderness coastline, and then we have the little town of Shelter Cove, and then another 18 miles of wilderness. So all of this is absolutely stunning. It's also in Humboldt County. Has anybody heard of Humboldt County? Should I go there? Humboldt County is known for the redwoods, also the spotted owl, also some of the best salmon habitat a long time ago, and it's also known for getting just a ton of rain. A very difficult place to live. And in the 90s, there was a big push for conservation because all of these forests were logged very, very heavily. And there were roads and bridges and culverts put in, and a lot of the rivers got blocked up. And so they went back with machines and they decommissioned some of the roads, brought them back to the native slopes, vegetation. So that's what it looks like a few years later. You know, pulling out the roads, pulling out the culverts, getting the water to run once again. And I was brought in by the BLM and the park director, Gary, who was like, you know, we made all this wilderness area, but that really kicked a lot of the bicyclists out. Like they never really could go in there because the trails are very steep and they went down to the ocean. We'd like to create a trail network for bikes. And I said, what about our hikers? What about equestrians? It's like, no, this is going to be single use. And I said, are you sure? Because it would create a link from the hiking trail up to another hiking trail. So it still is bike optimized, but it's still open for hikers and runners and some equestrians. But it really is for bikes. So there's a great quote. The mountains jut out of the Pacific like knives and drop straight down to lush river valleys that are often compared to the Congo because of their impenetrable vegetation. Of all the places I've ever designed a trail, flagged a trail, built a trail, this was the most difficult. Sometimes you can't see from here to that door because it's so thick. And it's not happy, wonderful, flowery vegetation. It's usually white thorn laced with poison oak, you know? And what we wanted to do is bring in the Cs. This is a youth corps called the California Conservation Corps. They'd never built a mountain bike trail before. So we did lots of different clinics, bringing them up to speed on different types of drainages, different types of turns that are more bike optimized, but still shared use. And, you know, my first visit, we got the dozer out and we started building, and pretty much wherever we put the dozer where there was already an old road. So we basically recycled the road corridors for our trail. And some of these decommissioned, you can see this old road, right? There's the edge, goes down to here. So when we had the decommissioned areas, we could make the trail a little more purposeful, a little more sexy, a little more bike specific. You know, jumps and rollers and berms to make it really, really fun for a descent. So it was one way. And then trail segments that had never really been worked by machines, we did those by hand. Why? Because we wanted to just have a lower footprint, a smaller footprint on that land. And then as the trail progressed, lots of different schools came in and there was planting done, and so there was a big push for more conservation, you know. So we didn't bring any, you know, weeds or anything like that. There was lots of planting that went on. Over time, the rains came back and we're seeing the salmon are running again. Big deal. By 2007, this many people had helped with the Paradise Royale. Grand opening, it's a bicycle chain. So she's the director for the entire BLM Arcata office. She's manages millions of acres of lands. And so it was a real partnership success story, bringing everybody together. And this is in the middle of nowhere, you guys. It's not just about having a great trail, it's about marketing that trail to bring people in. And the second phase, we wanted to do something at the campground because this is pretty far away from a town. We wanted to have a bit of a skills area or just a pocket bike park. So we brought in a really great team, and we did some flow trails and even some engineered structures. And we had some easy stuff all the way to some more difficult jumps. Again, this is double diamond, believe me. But we had the director for the entire BLM fly out from Washington, D.C. And Gary, the director for the King Range, we were a little concerned that he might lose his job because we weren't sure if it was appropriate to put this bike-specific pocket park right at the campground in a national conservation area as our launch point onto the trail system. So all of us were a little bit nervous. And Bob, flew in with this entourage of people. It was during National Public Lands Day. We had 75 people out there. Most of them were kids and teenagers. And Bob couldn't believe it because in our parks, we're losing relevance. A lot of the kids don't see a reason to go out into nature. Hiking sometimes isn't it exciting enough. But by having this skills area, these kids were just all smiles because it got them outside. And he did a speech for the community later on that week, and that was his word, relevance. It's we have to find a way to make our parks and nature relevant to people of today, for children of today, for the next generation. So he said it, a campground that meets the needs of the 21st century. So phase 3, we wanted to go back to the wildness. Now, bikes aren't allowed in the wilderness, and this is all wilderness down here, but just on the other side of the boundary, this is a road, and our mountain bike trail system is here. But we didn't really get the ocean views that we had as hikers. As a hiker, I'm in the wilderness, and I'm right up against that ocean the whole way. But as bikers, we've been pretty much pushed away. But our new trail will connect down to the Paradise Trail where we're going to have these views for 8 miles. And so again, we started this next phase. Different high schools, volunteer groups. The California Conservation Corps donated $220,000 worth of labor to help us, to keep us chugging along. California, state of California, all the money, gone, done. BLM money, done, gone, nothing. So now it was up to the partners to find the money to finish this trail. So we've got a bike club, the Bigfoot, and also Humboldt State University. And so it got me back there for another season of building, just for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Again, a big celebration. And then the trail was stagnant for probably 4 years, where really not a whole lot of construction really happened. A little bit of volunteers were doing some tinkering, but we had this big disconnect of we ran out of money. And we ran out of knowledge on how to continue. 3 or 4 months ago, I was invited back. And basically it was the community who came up with the money, and I volunteered some time, and other volunteers volunteered time. And it was about a community that we never tied to before. And this is kind of what Christian and I saw yesterday up at Cuddly Creek is we can design and we can build and we can throw money into these trail networks, but it's very important for us to tie it in with the local community because in the end, it's going to benefit. If they've got restaurants, there's money. Filling the beds, the hotels, it's all about that tie. And our trail system does not come down into Shelter Cove, but one day it could. Money was found for the bridges across the streams, so now we have 2 bridges. So now you can ride this in the winter when the soil is actually better. We came in with 2 different machines, and the night before the volunteer day, we connected the 2 trails together. And we weren't sure we could because it was that difficult of terrain. And then that morning, Wayne was from BLM, we had to back the machines out and finish as much as we could so the volunteers would have a lighter load. And we weren't sure if we were going to get 5 volunteers or 10 volunteers. 60 volunteers showed up for a 3-day weekend in the middle of nowhere, you guys. That's how hungry they were. Now, the trail system is, I think it's about 12 years old, 10 years old now. And again, one of the mistakes we made was we pretty much said, hey, this is going to be a great thing, but we didn't have a whole lot of local mountain bikers. The nearest club was 2 hours away. Some of the people would come from 4 or 5 hours away. It was more about bringing visitors in. We didn't think about the locals as much as we should have. But because we gave them a great trail system, now I'm seeing people come up to me all the time who said, I've never mountain biked in my life. I'm 55. I just bought a $9,000 mountain bike, and I ride every day I can. Anyways, we finished the connection, and it's called the Pacific Rim Trail. It is 8 miles of ocean views, and it is absolutely astounding. First one ever in a national conservation area. But, you know, take this away from that little story is community ownership, partnerships. You know, a land manager who's very dedicated to see these things through for a long ways. You know, I do believe in the hybrid trail construction, where a little bit of machine built, a little bit of handwork, and definitely bringing in different artists. You know, I don't want to just have one trail builder because that whole park will have the same style. Bring in different artists so it has a lot of diversity. How are we doing for time, you guys? Okay? All right, keep going. So some things that IMBA's done is now we have a regional directors for all the different parts of the United States. And this is a model that's happening in other countries. In other words, it used to be that we would build, design trails in places because someone would let us. But now it's much more about a big picture strategy that could go on for many, many decades. It will. And it's all about managing the humans. I mean, one thing is for certain, there's more people than there is land. So it's all about managing your people through good trail design and good planning. So our RDs will rove around our country and they will look for, you know, a land agency and also a bike club or a bike chapter, but also a funding source and a community. So again, it's that triangle that we're trying to always look for to make it successful. I'm going to buzz through these a little quicker. So part of what we're doing now too is the gateway trail system. So we want to have a trail network that has something for everyone. And a lot of it has to do with the progression I talked of earlier, but also trail diversity. So much like a ski area, we have a rating system to kind of give you a guideline on, well, what's an easy trail and what's a more difficult trail. And there's also these same guidelines are used in Scotland, and theirs are a little different than ours. The Canadians have one too. But it's a tool to give you guys a little bit of a target to shoot at. And so this was pretty common in how we would design a system. Now I'm kind of walking away from the stacked loop because now what I'm doing is looking for more like hubs and different hubs and then clusters of trails is what I'll do a little differently than this. But here's a park we did, and because we didn't own the land at the bottom, we were missing our green circles. Now, of course, we have more greens, but when we started this, we didn't have that yet because we didn't own that land. it was up to the city to find and get a hold of these places so that we could have the easier trails. So we started out with sort of blues and blacks. Our white circle, of course, is our paved pathway. And then we graduated on to our greens. And then the blues, a little more narrow, a little more difficult, a little steeper, sometimes rockier. Black diamond, narrower, rockier. And then on to our gravity trails. We knew that these riders were looking for something really, really difficult. So let's do it in a sustainable way. We found an area that would there was rock everywhere, part of an old quarry. So we were able to move this rock around in a place that had already been sort of ravaged by man. So let's just recycle that same area. And this is a double diamond trail leading off of a blue. The blue trail goes down this way. So rather than rely on just a sign, we use a filter. So in other words, there's a very difficult entrance that's as difficult or more difficult than what you might see below. So that way it sends a message to our riders or our hikers that says, okay, if you're going to take this left turn, it's going to be very, very difficult. If you can't ride the filter, you've got no business riding this trail at all. So it's part of a way to manage risk. And then we also did a flow trail or a jump trail. And again, this really sort of brought the relevance to the kids. All that awesome single track and those long distance trails didn't really do it for the kids. But having, 4 or 5 jumps with a little push-up trail, that did it. So I've only got a few slides left. What IMBA's done now is we're working on what we call IMBA Ride Centers. And it's pretty much thinking of an area that has everything you would ever want as a mountain biker in one place. And Copper Harbor, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, they did a ride center, and I believe it only is at about 30 miles. It started out maybe in the 20-mile range, and they were at bronze, but they wanted to get to silver. And to get to silver, it wasn't that they added a ton of more miles, it was that the new miles were more thoughtful. They had beginner trails up to more advanced. Very, very, very difficult terrain. So a lot of their trails were built out of stone or out of wood. And I think what really put them into silver was the fact that the community needs that tourism. We're in the middle of nowhere, the very, very point of the Upper Peninsula, and we don't get a whole lot of people out there. So by seeing, the bike festivals, the bike races, the bike events, seeing people drive 5 or 6 hours to get to this place, population maybe 2,000, and just watching how hotels are starting to be full, restaurants are full because of these trails. So we have a whole sort of ride evaluation and application. Christian printed that out yesterday. And it's a great tool for, well, if we wanted to be a ride center, what does that mean? Park City, Utah is our first gold level ride center. And why it is gold is because, again, it's community. This is our Shared Use Trail Coalition, Mountain Trails Foundation. They've been building trails since the probably mid-90s, I'd say. And 450 miles of single track, all signed, mapped, linking 3 ski resorts and 8 land agencies. And these ski resorts, at the time of this construction, they didn't even get along. So they were not like buddy-buddy in the wintertime, very much in competition with each other for skier dollars, skier numbers. But the trail in the summertime linked it all up into one comprehensive trail network. I was part of this, and this is called the Armstrong Trail, and it was the first of its kind. It was a trail designated for climbing only. In other words, if you were on a bike, you were only allowed to use it as a climb. And when we flagged it, I thought we were kind of crazy. 3%, 5% grades. It's like, how are we ever going to get up this mountain at a 5% grade? It's become the most popular trail out of 450 miles because people can come from, lower elevations, lower fitness levels, crappier bikes, whatever, and they can make it through these beautiful trees up to the main trail, and then they can descend on any trail they like. But what this did for our hikers and our equestrians was it gave them a way down where they would never have to worry about a bike barking at their heels. So having a little bit of one way makes a lot of sense, or one way for one user. And now, of course, the Park City area is integrating with other attractions. And you can see this is more of a descending trail, right? It's more bermed and more flowy. And now several different communities have like pocket parks, where there might just be a few features specific to bikes. So again, it takes the pressure off the shared use network. My friend Sarah, who's an avid cross-country rider, great skier, when she goes for a ride, she wants lots of distance. She wants to get a workout. She wants to get into nature. Her daughter, who is 8, doesn't care about any of that. All she wants to do is have fun. And if you said, hey, let's go for a 20-mile cross-country ride that's mostly uphill, no way. There's no way she would do that. But by having some of this like bike park at a smaller scale for the kids, it sort of brings them into the trail world, which is what we're trying to do here. So they've got a balanced trail system in Park City. Right near the suburbs of this community, you've got the pocket park, and it gets the kids back outside where we want them. This is my last slide. This is in Sheridan, Wyoming, basically a cowboy town, very much into motorized use. Our hikers, our backpackers, our fishermen, hunters, not as much. It's like we're seeing more and more people getting on the motorized form of recreation. And this is the entrance into the Bighorns and eventually wilderness. And so I'm going to try to just paint the picture here for you guys, but there's a road called Red Grade Road that gets people from town up into the forest. And they basically ignore all of this because it's a very, very steep sort of slope. And we're creating a new system there. And even though it was about mountain biking, what I've done is gone in and said, you know what? I want to give a whole system of trails just to hiking only. So that they have a place where they can go and park and they can just have their own little network of solitude. And it's away from the busyness of this road and the motorized use that's just going on all the time. And then for my bikes, I want to put them at almost the very bottom and give them a flow trail for the kids, and then they can graduate from hub to cluster, hub to cluster, hub to cluster, and eventually get up into the system where it's more shared use. My equestrians, which is a very, very big part of the population, I gave them their own trail to get up to the system. And sure, we'll see hikers on that same trail, but we're not going to share bikes on that particular trail. That's the idea. And you can also park up here, and this is more shared use and more shared use. We've also included a shuttle because we have a trail that's going to be downhill only for bikes. So not am I only thinking about the hikers, but I also want to give the bikers a downhill trail that they can ride on that thing as fast as they want. And it's created for them. So the turns are very specific for the bike. So see what I'm doing here. Again, 30, 35 miles, but we're kind of dissecting everything into, everybody gets a bit of a thing of their own, and then once you get further away from the trailhead, then it's more shared because the land works that way. Now, we can't see this on here, but there's a corner of the map here where our Forest Service is, I think it's right here actually, is butted up against some neighboring ranches. And these ranchers, very much, it's privately owned, and they're very much into hunting of elk and deer. And so there's a bit of a privacy issue there. And if you were to see the map before, you would say, the first thing you would say is, wow, we should put some trails down here. But the thing is we're very, very high up, and there is a trail there already, but if we were to put another trail down in there towards the border to maximize the space, it would be basically like sending the bikes down into this hole and then expecting them to climb back out again. And if they don't, what's their escape? Through these private ranchers and ranches where these folks have had that land for hundreds of years and don't want anybody. They don't care if it's a bike or not. And we were just about to put these lines on the map, and I went out and talked to some of the locals, and they said, oh, that pocket right there is one of the richest areas for hunting bull elk in the region. And if we were to put bikes in that spot, even though the hunting season's only for a few weeks, it would be just a full-on battle. You know, so we lost, and we had to take away several miles of really great terrain. But then we hopped across the road and we found this area that's just all big boulders and granite slabs and a place where the hunters would not even think of going. So it was all about looking at the landscape and finding out what features worked best for what users and sort of compartmentalizing it a little bit so everybody gets a piece of the pie and we share some of it, but it's not disorganized. It's very much an organized system. So that's it for me, you guys. That's just kind of how we're doing things these days, you know, organizing the system.
You must have video those crazy boys.
What's that?
You must have a video of those crazy boys.
The crazy boys? Which ones? The
ones that do the really top stuff.
Yeah, we could go online and see all kinds of stuff like that. I'm not sure if I have any movies right here now, but I mean, I might have. Why do you want to see that stuff, or?
One would be nice.
That'd be fun. Let me see what I have.
I've actually got two questions.
Uh-huh.
Sort of around sustainability.
Yep.
I'm interested to know what sort of techniques you recommend in areas of that are sensitive to things like pathogens in the soil or moulds and things. We've got a real issue in the Adelaide Hills with Phytophthora, which is transported sort of through water and so on. And techniques that you can adopt to try and minimise or even avoid issues around that.
Since it's the Phytophthora issue, which I'm going to hand that over to Kane because these guys have been through it and have really found, I think, some of the best practices we've seen. You know, so I think you guys have already figured that one out. But before we go Phytophthora world, I will talk a little bit about invasive weeds. You know, because to me, when I do a new trail, I don't want to introduce new plants to a system. And that's something I take really seriously. It's oftentimes that we say, okay, we're going to build this trail, and then someone's going to come in and maybe plant something to make sure we don't have weeds come in. But I think it should be part of the planning and the bid or the tenure that you're going to do a native planting and really take the time to find the right plants and seeds that should go in there, because once you've dug up that trail bed, whether it's hand-built or machine, there are weeds that can come up. So, because I've seen it go both ways. I've seen trails I've done come back a year later and it looks all native, like a laser cut the thing. And I've seen other projects where we've seen thistles come up and other invasives, and to me that's, you know, we've got to find a better solution there.
So I noticed you had a slide there that showed a sort of fairly narrow boardwalk structure that was elevated, bike riding on that. And I just wondered if that was something that you have used in some of these sort of sensitive areas to control that sort of threat.
We did see a lot of that at Mount Buller.
Right.
And, you know, Kane knows what that stuff's called. What do you call it?
FRP, fiberglass reinforced plastic.
So I need to bring that back to the States, because I've got a lot of places like where it's sandy. That might be a great solution, or it's the other way around. It's too wet. You know, something else we're doing now is, and we've been talking about it quite a bit, is, yes, you need like a, you know, a really thick document, you know, sort of that master plan. It's, you know, when I showed that Paradise Royale story, part of the story is that when we started, we didn't really know how big to go. We didn't really have a really clear vision on you know, just, you know, how far to take it. And that really hurt us. You know, what we should have done, and what I do now almost every place I go, is I really work with the land managers and the clubs, the community, and go, what is the possibility, people? And really create a map that shows the absolute end. You know, something that could go on for decades, so that you ask for the big picture money. You know, because when we started Paradise Royale, someone had been near the person who had the hands on the money and asked, well, what do you need? And at the time it was like $250,000. We should have asked for $2 million, you know, and we really should have had that plan. And it might not have been, you know, 60 pages. It might have been a map with some lines that were really well thought out and you know, understood and approved. But that would have given us that blueprint that we really needed to go into the future for generations and generations. And so what we'll do quite commonly now is, before we get to that master plan, is, and this is more of a bike park, but I might do just some renderings of the possible trails, and even maybe show some images of what those trails might look like, and even just show, again, these renderings of, well, what's a flow trail? What's a skills area? And that can really help sort of sell the vision. You know, and again, this stuff's a little more on the upper edge, but we'll do this quite a bit with the lower level, entry level skills area type of stuff. So it's a really good tool. I think I heard this at the conference. I think Rod and Yurt said that maybe, is it's like, it's great to have this really thick master plan, but it's also nice to have this one-page map that anyone could understand and just look at in a few minutes and go, wow, I get that. What do we need to do to make this happen?
Joe, I'm interested to hear what work you've done with people like public transport authorities and accommodation agencies, tourism agencies, people who might be able to get people who want to use bikes to a destination who don't necessarily want to drive, or might want to stay in bed and breakfast accommodation and that type of thing. Have you done work with those sort of people?
Yeah, so I think Boulder was a pretty good example, wouldn't you say? You know, I was just in Alice Springs, and again, when I'm in Australia, I don't bring my bike, because everywhere I go I have to fly. And every time I fly, I don't want to have to pack up the bike, put it in a box for 3 or 4 days at a time. So I think for a lot of places, it's pretty key that we can provide the bike hire and to have a nice wide range of bikes to rent. And we're seeing that in many places. You know, I didn't get to show the slides of Scotland and Wales, which I think a lot of us have seen here before, but every trail ride center has a bike rental area. So basically you can show up from outer space with nothing, dressed like, you know, and get everything you need to go on a bike ride, much like a ski area is. You know, and I got to work in Japan for a few seasons, and I was amazed at how you go to a rental shop, and not only did they have the skis or the snowboards, they had the clothes. I couldn't believe it. It was like you could just show up at a bike rental place and have, you know, hats, goggles, gloves, pants, jacket, the whole bit to go out skiing or snowboarding. And, you know, that's, I think, where we're headed with a lot of our trail ride centers too.
I'm interested to know your feedback from like the avid, hardcore bushwalker hiker who, because I'm one myself, and I ride also, but the last thing I want to see in a wilderness zone especially is a bike, you know, in front of me or behind me, You know, you want to be out there by yourself and not see one other person for like 6 days. So,
Right.
you know, what type of feedback have you got from, are they being eradicated from wilderness areas like the hardcore hiker?
Well, so again, I'll just use the states as an example, is all of our lands are pretty much segregated into who gets to use what. So it's not about, you know, me or Kane or Christian to say, well, we can put a trail here, there. It's already been decided that our wilderness areas, no bikes allowed. That's just how it is. And then our national parks, yes and no. We're starting to see more of these trails that might happen in our national parks. Canada, national parks, bikes are allowed. You go to Jasper and Banff and some of their biggest iconic national parks, and you'll see shared use. Now, as you get further from the trailhead and you get into really difficult hiking trails, you're not going to see that many bikes because the terrain just dictates that. But so for what I'm doing these days is, because of what you just said, is I'm a hiker. I hike so much you wouldn't believe it for work. And I'm also a trail runner. And sometimes I want that solitude, or I want to see less people. So I try to create a pocket that's more of walking only. And I've seen conflict between walkers and runners. All right? And to me, that just seems ridiculous. But it's because the runner's going at a different speed, and you start to see conflict. And just try it. Go down to downtown Adelaide right now and walk on those sidewalks and see if you create conflict just by walking a little faster. So really the big picture is we've got to share these lands. There will be shared use, but let's also think about some single use, single direction to take the heat off of it. I mean, what we've done, you know, I have a whole other series of slides that goes into Salt Lake City, Utah, which has pockets of wilderness for no bikes, but you know, we're talking almost 1 million people, and there's trails everywhere, and conflict could happen. So what they've done on some of the trails is they're switching days. So if you want to come down this iconic trail, I think bikes get the odd days, something like that. So we swap over days. So as a hiker, if I want to go and use that trail, and it's a long distance trail, I do it on an even day, and then I don't have to worry. So in our country where the population's, this has really been going on for 10, 20 years now, we have to find ways of managing it that work.
So with your single use, is it more about the trail not being suitable for the other users, or is it providing them with an alternative?
Yeah, that's a good one.
How is compliance with that?
Yeah, so if I work in the desert, if I'm working in a desert sort of situation, bikes do not go on sand very well. So any sections of sand right there, that almost ticks them out of the list, off the box, you know, and so I can put the bikes on the rockier areas where my horses would not like to go. So I can use the land sometimes.